In a world with artificial intelligence, how do we transform education? Thanks for tuning in. I'm Daniel Lopez, and this is the AI Education Conversation, where we explore the opportunities, risks, and impacts of AI across education. If you'd like to join the conversation, check out the AIeducationconversation.com. Let's jump in. Hey everyone, I hope the week is treating you well. In the early days of this podcast, when I made the decision to put myself out there wasn't a massive audience of folks lining up to talk about AI or reacting to some of the episodes I was publishing. It took a couple of months of talking into this mic and believing in what the AI education conversation could be to get where we are today. Early on, though, there was actually a really enthusiastic EdTech podcaster with well over 150 episodes and a robust global audience who reached out to me to say how much he was enjoying my podcast, and he even invited me to come on to his podcast, My Edtech Life, as a guest. He didn't have to do that, but I'm grateful that he did, as since then we've had some really cool conversations, and I now consider him a mentor and a friend. Today's episode is a full circle moment for me as I now get to switch the roles here and welcome Alfonso Fonz Mendoza, founder of the My Edtech Life podcast, to join our conversation. In addition to all of the learnings he's gained from talking to education and technology leaders for over 270 episodes, Fonz is an instructional software specialist for a public school district in Texas, meaning he has such deep expertise on technology in schools, and he is tremendously qualified to support schools with thinking through the implementation around AI in schools. I think you will experience Fonz's expertise real quickly. There were certain moments where I honestly felt like I was looking into an AI kaleidoscope, where I could see a vision for an AI powered school at the end, but the layers of complexity in getting there can feel very overwhelming in the moment. I appreciate Fonz for breaking it down in a way that was comprehensive but also digestible. After checking out my conversation with Fonz, I would highly recommend you follow my EdTech Life on your favorite podcast platform and dig into the treasure trove of conversations Fonz has available for your learning. If you're interested in my takeaways, check out the companion show notes in the episode description or sign up for the conversation at the AIeducationconversation.com. I share all my show notes with my community 12 hours before sharing with my social media networks. If you want to continue supporting the podcast, a rating, a review, a share on social media, or recommendation to a colleague goes a long way in helping us to amplify our space and host bigger conversations. If you have any other thoughts on today's episode, you can join the conversation or message me on LinkedIn. And finally, if your school district organization is ready to explore AI and make a change, I am available for workshops and consulting at the AIeducationconversation.com. Humans at the heart of education. Enjoy the episode. Thanks for agreeing to come on. It was only a matter of time.
Yes, of course, man. Of course, and especially with everything going on right now and been hitting up LinkedIn hardcore talking about privacy and the privacy policies for a lot of these AI apps that are getting into the classroom. And it's very scary, man. It's the Wild West out there, and people aren't reading the terms of service, and it's just a cash grab and no transparency. There's only been one company because I said I want to do a company like with the panel with people. Just I said I don't want you to show off your app. I want to just talk about privacy, and I think that would bring peace of mind to a lot of people. And I think that's where the conversation is headed right now too, as well. So I know like a lot of districts right now, they don't have a policy, and it's kind of like teachers are driving it, and teachers are going into using these apps, and but they're not reading terms of service. And there was this app that they're like, well, since they don't do a single sign on, and we're just sharing this code with them, they're fine. But if you read an OpenAI's, there's an OpenAI message board, and it'll talk to you there that it doesn't matter if you're 13 or if the kids, it should not be used at all whatsoever. And that's one of the things that they recommend. And so it's just kind of bringing that to light that a lot of these companies are kind of getting away with a lot. And I posted one recently where all companies say the following: it's should anything happen, you will not hold us responsible for any of this that happens. You're gonna have to deal with our third party. And so where's the transparency there? Where are you leading us into? So that's been my main concern. And it's been, I guess, more more now so talking about like the bias and everything that's going on and the outputs and just the danger. And we're not really taking our time. And the fact that a lot of apps are preying off of the burnout and preying off of teacher
Yeah.
efficiency. As teachers, we want to be efficient and we want to do what we can, but at what cost? And I mean, I don't want to sound like an alarmist, but at the same time, I hope I come out in a meme that says this didn't age well because everything worked out well. But, I think it's too soon. And I just don't want there to be something terrible to happen to a school district to live through that and do, hey, I did a 3-year contract and your app went under after 1 year because of X and O issue. And now we're out those 3 years and so on. And we just need to be very cautious with all those things, man.
Yeah, I feel you. I think it's something that I've noticed has come up in a lot of my recent episodes too, quite a bit more. I've been lucky to have had a string of guests that were like pretty knowledgeable about
Mhm.
like privacy and historically just what the process looks like to bring in any type of technology to your school. So it's been very interesting to just hear their perspectives on it. I would even like probably put you in that camp as well as somebody who's obviously you have probably a more of a familiarity and just a comfort in reading things
Mhm.
like privacy policies compared to the average person. But what I think I'm hearing and what I'm definitely gonna ask you as we really get into it here is just, does it feel like the language and the structures that we have, the, like, playbook around how technology would be embedded into school, the agreements that you would sign, does it feel like that actually is sufficient for this type of technology, or does today require something new and evolved? I think
No.
is something I'm curious
And
about,
that's
you
a
know?
wonderful question, Daniel, because honestly, I don't think those your, I guess, run of the mill year after year technology parent agreements are
Yeah.
no longer valid, man. Like CTOs, curriculum, all stakeholder superintendents, they really need to get down and talk about this and really inform. Because here's my thing, like I am not anti this tech. I mean, this tech is great, but done right. And right now, my
Mhm.
biggest fear is that it's not being done right. And there's a lot of people getting taken advantage of and being used just as marketing big time just to get these apps recognized and get into classes. And I know there's a lot of people that have skin in the game and presenters, they live off of this and do those things. But when you're not doing it right, like that's where I kind of have an issue. So revisiting those policies and just asking companies, "Hey, man, I just want you to be transparent. Is this plugging into OpenAI API? Yes or no? If it's yes, sorry, like we got to move on to something else because we can't use you." And that's what it comes down to. And I think once that conversation is being had, maybe companies can go back and revamp and say, "Okay, maybe we need to do different models." Like I know short answer, Adam Sparks, his company's doing something different where they're actually using AWS, and what it does is they'll be using a server, but you're not directly talking to a server. At every moment, you're doing a copy of each of a server at a time. So it's not really filling in through just keeping your data and so on because it's just a copy of a copy of a copy. So to some extent, I mean, they're at least they're being active in kind of trying to do things the right way. Now, is it going to be perfect? It could be, it may not, but it's just important to have those conversations, and to me, Daniel, what it all comes down to is if you can get the parents in that conversation. I had a gentleman, like, I posted on his TikTok, say, "Hey, man, like, how do you get around the terms of service?" "Well, I send an email out to parents." But do you? Like, do you really send an email out to parents? Are the parents all responding to you? Do the parents know what you're actually using and doing? And what could that consequence be? So, again, going back to my passion for outreach too, is I've always felt that schools have not communicated well with parents and really including them
Mhm.
into the learning community per se, because it's always just learning community is soups and everybody under and students but never parents. And now I think that parent conversation is even more crucial now because parents need to be informed. And like Dr. Neka says, it's just speaking to them through familiarity will help just assess the situation and put things at ease also because parents think that AI is something like, oh my gosh, this is Skynet and so on and so forth. But just in talking to them with, hey, the apps that you're already using on your phone, when you're sending a text, it's predicting your next word, things of that sort, then they can be, okay, now how is this going to be used in education? Okay, so I have the option to opt in or opt out. Many parents, those that feel comfortable, will opt in. However, those that opt out also, now what? Like now, but there has to be some sort of equity, and you can't just push them aside also and say, well, you're not using the app, so that's too bad. So I know it may pose a little bit more, I guess, work on for a teacher saying, "Well, now I've got these kids that can use AI, but this 1, 2, or 5 students can't. Well, what am I to do?" Well, what we've always been doing, it's the art of teaching and engaging students, but really using the AI as that additional tool, not your go-to, and I think that's what I'm seeing a lot too. App hopping, going from app to app, and are we doing it for our sake? Are we doing it for the student's sake? Is it really benefiting the student? Is there research that shows pedagogically that, hey, this was it? This is the silver bullet. This is what's helped? Or is it just because we're looking for productivity and efficiency? So definitely a lot of questions that, that I've been reading so much into on that side of it. But going back to the original question, yes, terms of service and those technology allowable technology forms definitely need to be revamped, revisited, and really for this next coming year because this isn't going anywhere. And I'm glad. I mean, the technology is too good, but it needs to be done right. And I think we definitely need to hold companies accountable to show us and be transparent because I know once this word gets around, as far as a lot of people that are saying, like, hey, read the terms of service, the first thing that school districts will say, well, it says COPPA and FERPA. So they'll hide behind that. But when you go in deeper and deeper and it says, hey, I'm not going to be responsible for anything that happens, whoa, here's a flag. And there's a lot of people on LinkedIn that are big people, big names in the space, and they're saying like, "Hey, check out this app and check out what they're doing." And I'm thinking to myself, are they not reading terms of service either? I mean, we need to do our due diligence because people will just say, "Hey, so and so is using it. I'm going to go ahead and use it and do it." And because they see it on Twitter, they see some influencer using it and so on. So that's just a big concern and a big red flag now that I slow down our initiative too because of this. And I talked to my directors and I talked to my CTO and saying, hey, we're going to need to revisit and we're going to need to all get in a room together before we even move on because this can cost us dearly. But then as far as data breach or just data getting out there or something happening to our systems, and we just want to make sure that we cover everything, cover our bases in all sorts of ways. And more importantly, obviously, help our students too as well, that they don't get into any hot messes with any data and personal identifiable information and things of that sort.
Yeah. No, I mean, that everything you just said resonates so much. I mean, if I'm even going back a little bit to your first point, I would just say, yeah, the parent engagement piece, totally agree. I mean, as someone who's spent most of my career in college access, I mean, that even in that field where the policies, the procedures, the routines are a little bit more established, maybe not in this year because of all the nonsense with the FAFSA, but historically, the process is a little bit clearer. Even there's so many instances where there's high schools or there's classrooms or where just the family engagement piece is always the thing that is deprioritized, which
Yep.
I understand why, because to your point, there's just so many other things you got to prioritize first, just around like how do you advise students, how do you do some of that? But then the impact of that is you get to senior year, students are applying to college, and then parents and things are being asked for like tax forms. You're like, you want my tax forms? What?
Yeah.
you and think, but so to your point, I mean, I could see so many equivalents on this side where bringing them along
Mhm.
is just such a critical piece of this conversation, right? Allowing them to help co-create the vision of your school. And yeah, I mean, just briefly to your other point, I totally agree. It has actually been a little bit surprising to me how many of I would consider to be some of the largest thought leaders in this AI education space that I actually really respect are a little bit more explicit at this is a great tool. This is a great tool. And I just feel like I'm at a position personally where I haven't really made strong endorsements around like any tools. I talk a lot about my personal usage
Mhm.
with ChatGPT just because that is the tool that I personally use a
Mhm.
lot. But a lot of these more specialized tools, I just, to your point, I just don't feel like I know enough. And I know if I like say I'm using this tool, I don't want people to think that I'm endorsing
Yeah.
these things, especially at this stage where I haven't done as much reading around privacy policies and getting into the weeds to that stage. Before we like really get into it further here, dude, welcome. Welcome to the AI education conversation. I feel like we started off fast and furious,
Yeah, I
but
didn't even
yeah,
know
I'm
we
just
had
really
started.
excited to
Sorry.
I no, it's I mean, I just hit record and we start when we start. That's just like my vibe. But really want to welcome you to the space. I know that around the same time, actually, maybe a little bit earlier, a year ago, I had the opportunity to go onto your podcast, My Edtech Life, and speak to you. So feels like a really cool full circle moment now to where the roles are reversed a little bit. So really excited to just welcome you and to have the conversation we're going to have today. We already started to have it a little bit. I think that's just because we're both so excited about this and passionate about this topic. But before we get further into this, we've alluded to some of your roles a little bit. I'd love to just maybe first ask you and give you an opportunity to share a little bit like how did you get into education? What are you doing right now? What are some of your roles and what some of the ways you're entering the space?
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Daniel, for the invite. And it's an honor, honestly, to be here on your show too. I know you were on my show a while back, and I think you had just started. I think you were like on episode 7 when I had invited you on, and around
Yeah, it was
episode
early in the
7 or 10, early in the
early in the game.
game.
Yep.
And I discovered your podcast, and I was like, dude, oh my gosh, like you're taking it to the next level because you're doing it from kind of like a different perspective where you have more of an overview than I do in my sense. But that's what I love, that we're talking about the same thing but different perspectives. But man, I'm glad that you're doing well and that your podcast is definitely resonating with a lot of people and being listened to and being shared, because you definitely bring that passion. So thank you so much for the invite. And for myself, for many of your guests who may be listening and getting to know who I am for the very first time, my name is Alfonso Mendoza. I am an instructional software specialist for a school district in the Rio Grande Valley in the southernmost tip of Texas. So, if you're familiar with San Antonio, I am still 4 hours south of San Antonio, and there is more Texas south of San Antonio. So, I reside here also in a small town called Edinburgh, Texas. Very small population. I'm a valley boy. That's what we call ourselves here. We're from the valley. And actually, my goal was never to go into education, believe it or not. I actually started off with a bachelor's in marketing or in business administration with a specialization in marketing, and did that for a couple of years. Then there was a fork in the road moment where I had to make some decisions based on parental health, and being an only child. There's a lot of and let me preface this again. Being in a Hispanic household in our culture and being an only child, there is a lot of responsibility on me with my parents not knowing any English, growing up very young. I was a language broker by the time I was like probably 8 or 9 when I finally learned English. So having to translate for my parents and living that life, that Hispanic life where we're just tight knit. So there came a fork in the road moment in my kind of early 20s where I had to make a decision based on my dad's health, and I had to find a job that would give me a little bit more flexibility. So I landed in education, and I absolutely fell in love with it. I mean, there was just something about it from that first year coming in, not knowing anything. I did an alternative certification program. I had enough hours in mathematics till I started off as a ninth grade math teacher. And I just fell in love with it, being able to teach students, being able to really, it was marketing. The way that a lot of the marketing skills that I had transferred over into education really helped me out, having to improvise, having to adapt at the probably in the snap of a finger to my students' learning styles, and selling the subject to all my students in a way that they would buy in. That was really the way that I've always seen my education experience, and it's something that I feel has made me really successful in the scope of being in the classroom. I've been in the classroom for 11 years, did 3 years as an high school algebra teacher, and then I moved down to elementary teaching 6th and 5th grade, doing math, science, social studies, and absolutely loved it. And now 8 years later, here I'm in this current role as the instructional software specialist, where I get to work with teachers, design the rollout plans for a lot of the platforms that we buy for our whole district, providing professional development for teachers, visiting with teachers, working with curriculum and instruction, working with the technology department, and just as an intermediary between both worlds has really helped me learn both worlds, the curriculum side, the tech side, and also just always working with teachers on the adult learning side and working with students fairly, not too much, but still enough. So it's been great. Like I said, 18 years later, and working on my doctorate in education. I would have never thought that I'd be doing it this long, but it's been very fruitful and it's been very rewarding. So I'm definitely thankful for this space and what it has given me. And now through my podcast, My Edtech Life, been trying to give back to the education community as well and engaging in wonderful conversations around educational technology and of course the big topic AI that we've been talking about for over a year now. So yeah, just trying to connect educators one show at a time.
Awesome, Fonz. Yeah, thanks for that overview. I mean, I feel like I even learned some new things about your journey that I didn't realize you had taught for so many years. And that's really cool. And just especially those experiences I'm sure you had, not just at the high school, but at the elementary level. Very different in terms of how you got to show up and how you have to engage with those kids, as you definitely know. And I know as well. But just really excited to welcome you. And yeah, I mean, I knew that you were from the Valley as well, but just also quick shout out to all the folks out there listening or all of my friends there because I think as you might have known, I taught and most of my educational career has been in the Houston area. And so definitely had a lot of friends and folks in my network from the Valley. One of probably the, to this day, the greatest teacher I've ever met in terms of his ability to just show up in the classroom, do that. He unfortunately has since passed away, but his name was Mr. Batista. He taught in middle school. He was an art teacher and absolutely phenomenal teacher from McAllen, Texas. So from the Valley. And so just huge shout out to all the folks from the Valley from Texas. We know you all are up in heart and doing that. And so, I mean, I think what I'd love to just talk about first, like knowing your breadth of experiences, is you've obviously been able to see just a lot of different technological iterations, I would imagine, over your career coming in and out of the classroom. And one thing I've observed in my time just in schools and in proximity to schools is how certain things can come and go so quickly, and we've had a lot of different cycles in certain ways. Some cycles are smaller, some are bigger. And I'm just curious as you think of some of those technological cycles, comparing like the AI current innovation cycle we're in relative to things like maybe, I don't know, social media, the internet search, or any other ones you would maybe put on the map there. How would you say like this current AI cycle ranks in terms of the wave it's causing within your school district or what you're noticing? Is it would we rank it more towards the top as in, like, really a game changer feels different, or is it similar to some of the waves that you've seen before?
Well, I think it to me there is that I guess, component of, yes, this is a game changer in that sense. But one thing that I've noticed, Daniel, kind of going back to the cycles, is that it just seems everything has a cycle and then it'll come back in a different iteration and kind of in a different wrapper and in a different, there's a maybe a different acronym for it and so on. So it's what I like about it is that they're really everything that we've seen, even though you feel it may die out, it'll eventually come back. And we bring those cycles back and there's still a lot of great practice out there from even way back when. And then all of a sudden I was like, oh, I was doing that before I always tell people, I was like, oh, that's something that I was doing. I was wearing the cool band shirt before the band was cool. And then it comes back up around and so on. But I think that as far as AI, this could definitely be a game changer in the sense of helping teachers as far as the efficiency aspect of things. Now, again, that is really what my biggest thing is that for teachers, there is a lot of additional work that needs to be done aside from the curriculum and the teaching side and those aspects of it. So, how can we help teachers? And we know that we always say, how can we take something off of the teacher's plate and not replace it with two other things, but how can we actually take something off of their plate? And although this may not be a solution to a lot of the systemic issues that may be happening as from district to district, there are many things that teachers are tasked with. This type of technology can definitely help be a little bit more efficient in that sense, as far as being just a teacher assistant per se, in that aspect of maybe even just writing emails or writing comments, things of that sort. But we just need to be very cautious with those things because Dr. Kip Glazier, she was on my show, and one of the things that she does mention is a lot of the apps that are out there. I mean, I know you and I will use ChatGPT, we'll use Claude, you will use that for our professional settings. It's just for us. And then we're not using it with children, with students and things of that sort. So we just need to be very cautious with those things that some of these tools are productivity tools, but we're trying to kind of bring them into the education space and kind of make them fit in that mold to be used. Now, is there a lot of promise in those tools? Absolutely. I think there is a lot of promise with those tools. Are we there yet? I would say absolutely not. We're not there yet. We need to definitely take our time and understand that this is more of a marathon and not a sprint. Oftentimes, districts or even ourselves as educators, we can get so excited with this new platform or a new app and what they're doing, and we just immediately want to bring it in to the classroom and use it. But is it something that we should be doing just yet based on some of the things that may come about as far as using this type of technology and the types of responses that you may be able to get that may be unfavorable? There is a lot of things that we need to talk about as far as bias, things of that sort, and inaccuracies in some of the outputs. So, is it something that can really revolutionize education? Yes. Is it something that we should be really just pushing right now? Not necessarily to bring it into students' hands. I believe this is just my belief just yet. But is it something that we need to really help develop our teacher skills? We need to definitely develop teacher skills based around AI, so more professional development around that. And as far as policy development too, as well, CTOs, curriculum departments, all major stakeholders, including parents, need and must be involved in these conversations as the technology moves forward. And we definitely want to provide that tech to our students, but in a responsible manner and in a way that is going to benefit not only the teacher, but the student in the learning process.
I think I'm pretty aligned philosophically to what I hear you saying, which is like with everything that we've learned about these AI tools thus far, knowing the tomorrow type of impact it can have, especially to some of our colleagues, our teachers, our counseling friends, our school leader friends who start to understand it and really are using it in the spirit of trying to become more efficient, trying to become more productive, hopefully just save some of their bandwidth, which we know is a tremendous crisis across here in the United States with just shortages in staff and especially large public school districts, really public school districts in general. But I think I generally agree with you, which is I feel like in media and just anecdotally and having conversations with folks, I have heard of some really cool student use cases that are out there that are doing, but I'm just like, I don't know. It just feels like there's a little bit more of a calculus you have to vet and go through as you think about some of the privacy risks or breach that are associated with bringing that into the classroom. Now, it's not to say that in the context of their home or anything like that, a student may choose to use artificial intelligence tools. But then when you just talk about exposing your school district to that, endorsing, I know that I was a part of a school district at moments where we had some technological breaches and there were some huge impacts there from just data being leaked to actually lawsuits around things such as copyright. And so there's a lot of like ugly, I think, side effects of things that can happen when you systematically try to deploy a technology, especially in the hands of students, and you're not really being totally thoughtful about what that looks like and what that experience looks like. And I think something else that I've also really heard folks say, which also really resonates, is just because you're not necessarily bringing generative AI tools to the classroom and putting them in the hands of students doesn't mean that you can't have conversations around AI or try to develop experiences that are AI facing, just not actually deploying a tool specifically. Maybe it's about watching some videos and having some conversations about it or finding some other ways to have some conversations and develop that AI literacy without endorsing and deploying a tool that may still be very early in their learning journey around some of the pros as well as some of the risks associated with that kind of systematic
Yeah.
adoption there.
And so one of the things that I know that you mentioned is that there are a lot of resources out there, Daniel, honestly. And there's probably way more than we need, but I mean, it's great. I mean, we're getting all different perspectives, but you're right. AI for Education, Amanda Bickerstaff, you got Alex Cotran at AI EDU. They've got some amazing student facing activities where you're having these conversations, understanding more about the concept of artificial intelligence, the way that this is really working. And I always allude back to the words of Dr. Neka McGee, who I know she's been on your show, and I got to do a panel with her and I got to interview her this last week. But it's just the term that I heard her use when we were on the panel at TCEA was just being a cautious advocate. Many times you may be hearing or listening to this conversation and you maybe think, oh man, this guy is just an alarmist and he's just trying to scare people and do all those things. But no, it's just really I'm a cautious advocate because like I was talking to Daniel in the pre-show is I really want this technology to work. I mean, it can do wonders and it could really change education for good, providing better learning experiences, helping teachers also, again, like you mentioned, bandwidth and things of that sort and the learning process. And there's so much promise there, but sometimes it's like we dive in too deep, and then it won't be until maybe something may happen. Hopefully, it will never, but maybe there's going to be a lesson learned somewhere along the way because of data and data breaches and things of that sort. And again, also being very cautious as to the terms of service that every company is offering. Because if you're going to use this not only for yourself as a teacher, but you're putting it in the students' hands, there's definitely a lot of risk there. So it's very important that CTOs and all major stakeholders really come together, communicate, read through terms of service, and really ask companies just full on, we want you to be transparent with us. What might be some of the consequences? What might be some of the things that we might run into and deal with so we know if we're going to go ahead and use your platform or not? And right now, I know that there are many platforms out there that are already getting into and being used in the classroom. And when I go and research a lot of those applications and see the terms of service, it is very scary. And they've got all the major verbiage there as far as, oh, this is COPPA compliant, this is FERPA compliant, and so on. And for a lot of school districts that may not to go in deep like I do as far as terms of service and privacy and read those things, they may say, okay, they've got the alphabet soup we need. Let's sign off on this. And then later on, you don't realize, wow, I didn't know that we might be getting into this kind of trouble. And just to kind of describe a little bit about that, I did make a post or put a post up. I think it was either last night or the actually 2 days ago, terms of service for a specific company. And I was looking very carefully and everything looks great. But then oftentimes you read through that first layer and you're like, oh, everything's good. But then once you start clicking into the links of terms of privacy and then terms of, privacy and then data, it goes in deeper and deeper. So for a lot of them, I'm just going to kind of read off the post here because I have it open. But for me, it's that limitation of liability, one that gets me to where it says the company is not liable for any damages, direct, indirect, incidental, consequential, punitive, or otherwise arising from the use or inability to use the service, even if advised on the possibility of such damages. Liability will be limited to the fullest extent permitted and applicable by law. So, all of those things, many times companies saying, hey, if something happens, you're not to hold us responsible. You're going to hold our third parties responsible. But wait a minute, third parties, what are you talking about? Here it says that you're not going to be using our data or saving our data or using our data for anything. But then on that second page or third page that people may not read through, it says, by the way, your data can be used for our third parties who provide this service for us. And now you're like, well, wait a minute. Well, who am I sending my data to, you or to that third party? And how is this working? So, definitely a lot of things to think about there as far as that responsibility. And even this application that I mentioned too, it talks about the user responsibilities. This is your responsibility. You're going to use our app, but you're going to be responsible for number one, checking for bias in the AI models and try to mitigate it. I was like, wait a minute. So, on top of me teaching and providing the knowledge that my students need, if there was an output that comes back with bias, I mean, now I'm going to be having to be the one reading through this with a fine tooth comb and making sure that's accurate. And it should be. It really, teachers need to be very cautious. And with the types of outputs that they are getting, keep in mind that this is a black box of data that is there. And you don't know what's really in that black box until you start seeing some of those outputs. And the information that they're using. So just being very cautious with those things. And then it also says that we, as the users, would be responsible to verify the accuracy of AI generated content before sharing, things of that sort. So it's very scary, Daniel. Like I said, there's so much promise, but right now I think that there's a lot of companies that are competing to be number one in this space, in the education space, that want to be in those classrooms, that want to grow. And I'm not saying that they're really well intentioned because the tools mean well, but the intention as far as on the back end of these things, as far as the responsibility and the liability, we need to question those things and say, hey, is this something that's going to get us in trouble? later on in the future. Or one of the things that I always think about before Dev Day, there was a lot of little mini apps that's, hey, what was it? It was Chat PDF and little platforms that would come up. Hey, pay us $5 a month and you can pop in your PDF and we'll do this. And a lot of those little platforms or smaller platforms, I should say, kind of after Dev Day. And now when you can create your own GPTs and do those things, they kind of went away. It was very interesting that I did notice that. And so, what if there's another kind of Dev Day that comes up and all of a sudden things change as far as using the API? Or maybe OpenAI says, hey, we've already got your one tool as a district and I signed a 3-year contract, what's going to happen now? I'm responsible that I paid 3 years and now you're no longer here, you're no longer in existence. How do I get my money back? Do I get my money back? So we just need to be very cautious. And right now, I'm just letting all my friends and people on LinkedIn and CTOs and people that I talk to just be cautious, be a cautious advocate, do your due diligence. We know that we definitely need to share this technology with our teachers and the students all at the right time, but there needs to be more emphasis on transparency from the application. We also need to do more teacher professional development also as well before we continue moving forward. Because honestly, I really do want this to work. This could really be a great thing for education overall.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much there to unpack, but I think one thing you said that I'm like holding is that piece you mentioned around the bias and how sometimes they will write down in MOU agreements or their terms of service that it's you kind of have the responsibility to mitigate bias. That's pretty wild. That would be the way that's structured in there. I mean, I it's interesting how I think a lot of the comments that I've also gotten recently on some of my former episodes have been around this idea of bias, and I've even been asked point blank by some folks like, "You keep saying there's bias and inaccuracy in the tools, but what do you mean? What are some of the biases that you're talking about?" And I'm like, "Well, well, first of all, I don't think it's like my responsibility to point out all the biases. I really think it's like the companies. But just to name some examples, there was a lot of outrage a couple of weeks ago around Google Gemini's image generation and how again they overdialed the quote unquote diversity piece, and the impact of that is there were some use cases where you're putting like very clear terms, generate an image of George Washington as an example, and it was showing like a Native American version of George Washington or a person of color. And there was a lot of outrage by that. There was a lot of folks that were really frustrated and angry by that. But the counterpoint that I would offer there is no, I totally agree that that needs to be fixed, right? We need to make sure that everybody feels seen, regardless of your ethnicity, culture, and your beliefs. But the reality is that if you go to Chat GPT today and remind you, this is like still continues to be the tool I use most frequently, especially for image generation. If you don't explicitly name racial ethnicity in some of the images that you want and you use words like successful or anything with positional authority, you are going to get a white man 100% of the time. So again, is that a bad thing? I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing, but it's important that we observe that, right? It's important that we aware if I put generate a successful person, an image of a successful person 10 times in a row, and it always is generating a white guy, what is the signal that sends when you now put that type of technology in the hands of a 14-year-old, right? As an example. And so that would be like one example. I think we've all seen multiple other examples of how bias continues to show up around political ideologies. I think there's been a lot of people who've been very frustrated by when you type in who's Joe Biden or who's Donald Trump as an example, there shows very different perspectives or there's some colored language around either of those candidates that seems to skew different ways depending on the different models that you're using. And so I think what makes it a little bit tricky from my perspective though, and I'm curious like where you lean on this is some folks have commented back to me and said things such as, well, humans are also biased and inaccurate. So of course these tools are going to be that like, but humans are too. And I think I received that, and I think I've wrestled with that question a lot because, yeah, that is true, but I think where my best thinking is on it as of today is, like, number 1, I still don't think the bar or the comparison should be with humans, right? I'm like, "Cool, but this tool is not a human," right? We're human. The second thing is, like, I think nobody would have the same level of tolerance if to use an analogy that has come up on a previous episode, if your phone was inaccurate part of the time, right? If your phone wasn't working 100% of the time. I think it was actually Amanda who might have mentioned in a previous Amanda Baker staff who you referenced earlier on one of my episodes. there would be an outrage, right? You're not going to be satisfied if your phone only works
Yeah.
75% of the time. So like, why are we not holding this technology, right? This is not a person, this technology to the same standard. But I do think it brings up this very interesting maybe set of questions that we have to explore, right? Where, yeah, it isn't quite a cell phone. I think we receive that, but it's also not human. So, what is like the standard, and what is maybe the type of data that we feel like is acceptable to ask for? What is the standard of tolerance we have with biases and inaccuracies, acknowledging that fundamentally generative AI tools are trained on human information. Humans are biased and inaccurate. Of
Yeah.
course we are, right? We all have different perspectives and different blind spots depending on our upbringing experiences, our set of knowledges and belief and all those things. So it does bring up just an interesting, I think, paradigm that we'll have to continue to navigate as we continue to learn more about these tools, have advances from the companies that are there. But the idea that we would be responsible as the educator to mitigate those biases and not the companies that are developing the tools is
Mm.
absolutely
No, I
ridiculous.
agree. And right now that you're talking about that, and I pulled up the UNESCO report and talking about section 2.7 in the UNESCO report, and I'll share that with you. Maybe if you, I don't know if you want to link it in the episode, but right now that we're talking, it's section 2.7 says reducing the diversity of opinions and further marginalization or marginalizing already marginalized voices. And it's interesting. It says here, ChatGPT and similar such tools tend to output only standard answers that assume the values of the owners slash creators of the data used to train the models. So it says, indeed, if a sequence of words appears frequently in the training data, as is in the case with common and uncontroversial topics and mainstream or dominant beliefs, it is likely to be repeated by ChatGPT in its output. So I thought that that was very
Yeah.
interesting right now that we were talking about this and that popped up. But it is very scary, Daniel. And I've mentioned it before. Look, I love the technology, but then the more I thought about it and even myself using it and then thinking about teachers using that very first output and taking it as it's gospel. Oh, yep, this is my first output. I'm going to go ahead and use that because ChatGPT gave me this answer, so it must be accurate. That to me is the scary part of it too, because again, it goes back to time. Like as a teacher, teachers are running in the red continually with having to multitask and making just so many decisions throughout the day that, hey, I need to make sure I do this and get this and reword this worksheet or reword this. And now all of a sudden it's, well, I'm just going to take that first output and I'm not even going to bother looking at it. I'm just going to go ahead and give it and share it, make a copy of it, or do whatever it is that I need to do with that assignment. And that could be the scary part. But like you said, we we need to make sure that we have those safeguards in place by these apps to make sure that we don't run into those issues and that as a teacher or anybody using it can really rely on that first output and say, okay, this is going to be solid. This is something that I can present. This is something that is accurate. Still look at it through that lens and making sure that everything is accurate because as we know with technology, not everything is going to be accurate. So it just all depends on that. But yeah, very important things to think about. And I know that it's going to get better. I mean, obviously they keep training models, but what kind of data do they keep popping into those models? And is this something that we're going to be continually seeing? One thing that really highlights that too, as well, is recently, and I don't know if you have seen it, Daniel, but there is a documentary on Netflix called Coded Bias and I'm so sorry, I don't wanna butcher her name, but it's Dr. Joy Buolamwini. I hope I didn't butcher that. I'm sorry, Dr. Joy, but she is part of that and talking about the bias and talking about how her experiment using facial recognition led to seeing how these algorithms and all the bias that's there. And then it opened up a lot of questions. And of course, she's got a great book also out that is definitely worth a read. So make sure that you check that out too. But it's definitely something that is interesting. And that kind of woke me up to the sense of as good as the technology is, just really be careful and just make sure you check your outputs. Don't trust it 100% completely with any of your outputs. Even for us as professionals, Daniel, I'm sure like we go through variations and just to get our thought process and eventually just try to get and convey our message is still something that takes time because we want to make sure number one that it's like our voice coming through and making sure that we're not getting any outputs in there that should not be in there, or that could be emphasizing a thought that can cause some issues that might be controversial, or things of that sort, because that's not what we mean to do. We really mean well, but even us as professionals and adults, it's still hard to navigate this technology and making sure that we're not making any of those mistakes and adding to the cause of the problem too as well.
Yeah, totally agree. And yeah, I love that you mentioned Dr. Joy Boyuelamini's book. I've actually read Unmasking AI, a really great book, would highly recommend it. That is something I would definitely endorse here. And to your point, what I love about the her book and the experiences that she shares as somebody who has obviously a tremendous amount of computer and AI expertise is I think really gives some clear visual examples where if it's difficult to really understand how biases can show up in the written text, a lot of her examples, as you
Mhm.
said, around like facial recognition, image generation. I think it, at least for me, it's a lot easier to just see images and know and very clearly see the differences in quality and see the output. As an example with the chat GPT piece I mentioned, and I know she mentioned something similar in her book around the facial recognition. The fact that a lot of these large language models are just trained on so many more, the volume of image of white
Mm.
faces that are being trained on some of these tools is so much higher. As a result, the nuance, the eyes, the anatomy, they look so much cleaner when they're able to generate an image, as an example, or do facial recognition. But then the lack of brown and black faces that are trained by these tools, when you say, I want you to generate an image of a black teacher supporting a classroom, you'll just notice, I think, a very stark quality as someone who's generated a lot of images. That's where I really know. And to your point, I mean, at the constant analogy she gives in the book, which I found fascinating, was around the facial recognition,
Yeah.
where she's using this technology on her screen. She's trying to essentially get the screen to pick up her face and identify her face. And I think it was to be able to just use like
Yeah.
filters over something like that for the AI. And essentially it couldn't
Mhm.
do it because of the color of her skin. And she had to literally get a white mask to put over. And that's when it finally picked it up. And so very interesting. I think if somebody needs just some clear ways to contextualize some of what we're talking about, understand why it's important, and even beyond just deploying it in schools and what it could mean for schools. She brought up some very interesting use cases that I had never thought about. Things such as, we're all talking about self-driving cars, and that fundamentally would be powered by AI. What happens if a black person's walking across the street? This facial recognition can't pick them up. They're going to get hit, right? And so there's just like very like real dangerous scenarios, things such as that she offers in the book that I found really fascinating as well. So love that you named and elevated that book here. I think I would definitely vouch for it as well. Let me turn to a slightly different topic here to get your take on this. You are somebody who has a pretty deep context, I think, of the ed tech sector, just based on your own podcast, folks you've talked to, and your role, and obviously schools, given that as well. I'm curious, what would you say are some of the strengths of each of those sectors, and maybe some of the challenges as
Yeah.
well?
Well, for K-12 space, I think at least in my experience and in speaking with other folks in my role, I know my role, the title says instructional software specialist, but really it's similar to a role like in another district. It could be like a digital tech coach, things of that sort. So we just have different titles in different districts. But every time I talk to my friends and colleagues from other districts, not just here in the Rio Grande Valley, but elsewhere around the state and even around other countries, I think for us in our role, the biggest challenge is how quickly teachers I call it app hopping, and they change from app to app, and they wanna try out the new things, and they wanna just bring in things. They go to a conference and they wanna start doing all these things without kinda just telling us like, "Hey, look, I ran into this," or "I learned this," or "Here's a new app," and so on. So, I know with our district, what we've tried to do is we've tried to really just simplify the process, and we've got 4, actually 5 major platforms that we use for the whole district. So those are the ones that we completely endorse, that are going to be for all our content subject area, our LMS, some that we have for annotation tools, some for screen recording, and so on and so forth. So we do that to kind of simplify the process. But then what happens, the biggest challenge is now, number one, you've got teachers that go to a conference and they bring in 20 different apps that they want to use. Unfortunately, and I don't know if it's just in my district, but I think there's other districts too, where because it's a onesie twosie, we can't support those apps because it's something that is not district approved for that matter. So the teachers are kind of like on their own doing this. And that could also be just kind of an issue because we don't know what it is that's being used. And also, does it fall in line with our curriculum and our standards? The other thing is too, is that schools also have or many schools, not just in my district, but I'm talking about many schools elsewhere, they have a little bit of autonomy where, yes, you provide those 5 platforms for them and you provide the curriculum and you provide resources for them, but then they'll go out and they'll purchase on their own something for state testing. And then all of a sudden now we've got 3 schools, 4 schools, 5 schools doing their own thing, but then we don't get to see any data to actually see, hey, is this something that's being effective? Is this something that we as a district, as a whole should consider so we can purchase for everybody? So I think for me, biggest challenge is that in being able to get data, not just usage, but also to see, is this something that is pedagogically sound? Is this something that is actually helping students succeed and are helping that growth process and being able to document that growth? Hey, this is where they were when they started. Hey, this is where they are at the end of the year or at the middle of the year. And that I think is very important. So for the K-12 side, at least through my experience, it's that we're trying to, I guess, kind of be uniform and making sure that everybody's on the same page. That has been the big one of the biggest challenges again. And I don't blame teachers for getting excited because we do have some early adopters and we do have some teachers that are great that are, I'm gonna quote, oh my gosh, I forgot her name. She was on my show, but Dawson, last name Dawson, Renee Dawson. There we go. Renee Dawson. I loved it. She was on my show and she mentioned she does something similar to my role. And she mentions in every district or in every school, they're always going to have 3 types of teachers. You're going to have your speedboats, your tugboats, and your anchors. So the speedboats are those early adopters that you just give them something and they're just going to take off with it. So those are those conference goers that come back and immediately they're going to plug in whatever they learned into their classroom workflow and so on. Then you have the tugboats that'll kind of learn it. They'll learn it a little slower, but then they'll also be the ones that'll help out those anchors and try and help the teachers out that may feel a little bit uncomfortable with the tech or just unsure or uncertain. So finding that balance there too and finding those advocates within the schools is something that is difficult sometimes as well because with so many teachers and so many grade levels, it'd be great to have kind of like somebody represent the technology department there to say, hey, this is what we're doing, this is what we're using, this is what we're seeing. So just that information, getting it to central office is something that has been definitely difficult and challenging in the K-12 space for sure.
I think as I was hearing you talk, especially about this like decision making framework almost that you go through as you're making decisions. I heard you really mention like student outcomes earlier. You were talking about like data, obviously the data privacy and some of the things you're kind of looking out for in those agreement pieces. And then also just like knowing that at the same time that's happening, there's external influences, right? There's teachers who come back, or there's folks in other roles that come back and are really excited about what some tool or product could do, right, for their day to day circumstance and situation. And you're having to consider that in the context
Mhm.
of 5 to 6 other things that you're holding given the roles that you hold, and so I definitely hold so much compassion
Yeah.
for deciders, I think, in this particular moment, if whether it's heads of school counseling department or assistant principals or school leaders or district leaders, because I think they're in a very similar boat where they're having to
Mhm.
just go through this checklist, right? And looking at it from the privacy angle, looking at it from the impact angle, looking at it from the just the adoption angle and how difficult that's going to be for folks to get on. I'm wondering, as someone who's spent a lot of time doing this, and you've already mentioned a couple of, I think, gems throughout, but what else is on your checklist? What else do you look for when you ultimately determine or make a recommendation to the leaders in your district that
Mhm.
we should get behind this versus where we shouldn't? Is there anything else that
Yeah.
you really would
So
would look for?
as far as the checklist and things to see, we actually have a checklist within our school district that we've created. So we have a rubric that really helps us out in driving those decisions. So one of the things that we're going to be doing this next year, and as there was a lot of ESSER funds these last 3 years, but those the I call it the ESSER fund is over. Because now it's like you're not going to get a lot of those funds and as like we used to. So now what we're doing is we're being very diligent with a lot of the platforms that have been purchased. We created a rubric and we go down that checklist. Number one is always going to be the student outcome. We need to do our research based on not just the white papers that they offer us, but what we do is we will actually, when we contact those platforms, we'll ask if there are any other platform, or excuse me, if there are any other districts around our area that are using that specific platform, and if they can put us in contact with their lead person at that district, and we'll actually call and ask some questions like, hey, as far as usage is concerned, what do you see? What are some of the pros? What are some of the not so pros, or some of the negatives or barriers to entry, things of that sort, so we can kind of get a feel of, okay, based on our infrastructure and based on our layout and our teacher makeup, is this something that we would be able to roll out with ease, and how easy would it be? I know one of the things too is definitely going to be the user experience for me, and that's a big one for me. I always look for applications that if you can get the teacher to where they need to go in 4 clicks or less, that already kind of goes into the not yes, but into, hey, let's heavily consider this, because we want to make sure that the user experience, not only for the teacher, is easy and great for them to use, because I don't want them to have to click 20 times just to get to one assignment. And also on the student side, we want to make sure that this is something that is going to be very student friendly and it plays well with the resolution of our devices, making sure, and as devices get older, the resolution and some things happen. So we want to make sure that our student is going to get the best experience for the learning process. So we have those rubrics in place, along also with cost. We also make sure that we get data, and obviously our goals, like what is this platform going to be? Is this platform going to be for state testing, as a state testing supplement? Is this going to be a tier 2 or a tier 3 support, or are we looking at this as our core content area, kind of a supplement or practice and things of that sort? So we'll break it down into several categories. And as a matter of fact, this come in 2 weeks, actually, we're sitting down and we're having a meeting where we've already put all our apps that we have at the district on a spreadsheet, and we're going to go through them one by one, vetting, checking for usage reports, checking to see student growth, and if this is something that is still good enough for us to keep for another year, or is it something that, hey, we're going to cut this and we're going to use this, and see if there's any duplication of efforts in a lot of those apps, because some of times we may have two apps that do essentially the same thing, but just because one may have an additional button that really doesn't do too much, but sometimes we get excited about those things. The other thing, Daniel, is that we also have a rubric, or actually a Google form that teachers can fill in at any time, or teachers or campus directors, whomever it may be, point of contact, if there is a specific app that we don't purchase at a district level, the principals will go ahead and say, hey, I've got some teachers that are asking about this. Maybe it's a whole department, math department, or maybe it's ELA, or maybe it's for the whole site. And this is what the application is. This is what the application does. This is the quote that they gave me for just my campus. And then they would let us know. Also, we ask if there's anybody on their campus that would be able to provide that professional development also as well. So if it meets those criteria, and then we look at that application and say, okay, let's call the app up, let's see what it can do. And what I love about this is that teachers can still, and the school still can make those suggestions, and sometimes they'll bring to light things that we didn't even know were out there, and things that, wow, this could definitely work great, not just for that site, but here for this other school, and so on. And so we've opened up that communication, and it's only been about 3 years that we started doing that, since we I've been in this role, and I'm absolutely loving it. And the teachers are actually excited and loving it, because now they feel that they have a voice, as opposed to saying, hey, these are your 3, 4, 5 apps and that's it. Now it's, hey, let me make a suggestion, because like I said, teachers are great at finding and being very resourceful and finding tools that may help their workflow, but also do help the students grow. And with all the work that I have and going out to campuses and so on, sometimes I don't have a lot of time to research certain things. So they'll tell me, and we'll research, we'll talk, we'll have those conversations, and then I can go ahead and present it to my executive directors and those decision makers. So although I'm not a final decision maker, I am an influencer. And so we get to all work together and just make the most of it. So I think that's something that's very important. And especially now that we're talking about funding kind of just slowly trickling away for this coming year. It's definitely important that you have a plan in place for this, and especially for the apps that you have now, and how you may maybe move some money instead of maybe renewing this. Now we can go ahead and say, hey, we found something that might be a little bit better, and kind of just being very creative with those monies to get the teachers the best tools that are out there and that are available. And also, data is important, making sure that you have that usage and monitoring usage. What we do is I run reports every 6 weeks for my executive directors for every application. And we check usage reports, and then we'll kind of have some discussions and say, why isn't this particular grade level using it? Or why isn't this particular school using it? And then they'll go and have those conversations. And sometimes it's just, well, we just haven't done it. So other times it's we forgot that it's there. I mean, they're just on the go all the time. And I get it. And then so sometimes then what we'll do is we'll just set up refreshers where I'll go do lunch and learns and just quick tips and things of that sort, just to kind of put it on the map again for them, and working in a collaborative way, not making it punitive, not making it, just something that's going to be a pain for them. We try and make it as easy as possible that we're collaborating in this. So it's not just a one-sided thing.
Man, I love the framework you just walked through. I feel like not only did so much of that resonate, but I feel like folks listening to this really got like a master class. If you really want to understand the complexity of taking something like an app or a product and bringing it to a school district, like what you just named was, I think, was so comprehensive on so many of the things that districts have to hold, people have to hold, and that's not even getting into any of the dynamics between relationships in the school, like financial. This is just like
Yeah.
the actual process, right? Not even any of those things. And one thing, I mean, that also stood out to me, which I'd never thought of, but then when you said it, I was like, yeah, that makes so much sense. Is that 4-click rule that you mentioned? There were so many times as when I was a counselor that just you're using these clunky apps that are so frustrating and can make your experience in the school so much harder than it has to be. And it's, dude, I just need to get these college forms in for this student so I can actually do what I'm supposed to be getting paid for, which is talking to students, not worrying about sending all these documents or whatever that the example is for other teachers out there. And I can imagine how really being thoughtful and having small little rules like that, like 4 clicks or less or anything like that, just really helping to make sure these apps are smooth and they're not the thing taking
Yes.
up the time, right? It allows the teachers, allows the folks working in schools to focus on what we actually need them doing, which is engaging with students, engaging with each other, not spending hours upon hours in an app or in a on a website or something like that. I got to ask you a bunch of questions about your podcast, right? So I want to turn our attention a little bit there and talk about My Edtech Life as somebody who has been served as a really good, just I think role model and template for even what I'm trying to do here on the AI education conversation. I'd love to ask you first and foremost as somebody who's had a whole lot of conversations. I think last time I checked, you were at over 100 episodes, maybe over 200 episodes that you've done. I know you've shared a little bit about what you're currently thinking about, but I'd love to just know maybe what are some headlines about what you've learned
Mhm.
along the way? You've had a really long, robust learning journey
Yeah.
doing this. What are you
Well,
learning?
as far
What's
as
sticking with you
podcasting
here?
or just like interviews or anything? Okay.
Just anything. I mean, just
Yeah.
any of the insights from that.
Okay.
I will ask you a little more about the podcasting piece. So if you want to hold that and maybe just talk more about the
Yeah.
insights that you're gaining, and then
Really,
we'll
like,
we'll talk about that
it's
other
been
piece in a second
it'll
here.
April 10th of 2024, the show will be 4 years old. And it's just been an amazing journey, just starting from the very beginning, obviously during COVID, April 10th of 2020, up until now, and having so many wonderful guests, educators, creators, education practitioners, founders, and so on. For me, my biggest takeaways are just really the connection with the guests and their stories. One of the things that I love the most is when I get to introduce my guests or have them introduce themselves. I always tell them ahead of time. I said, "Look, you're the star of the show, and I'm just here moderating the chat. Really, I just want people." And my number one thing I always tell them, I want people to connect with you first. I want my audience to connect with you, to know where you're coming from, your journey, before we get even into the meat of things at all whatsoever. And I think that's just so important because I want to make sure that what I am bringing to the education space and into as far as guests is something that is going to bring value to the audience that I have, that's going to bring value and push conversations within the education landscape to see what we can do better. And so for me, that's just been my biggest passion. And I did like 2 hour or 2.5 hour podcast. I got interviewed by a gentleman from LinkedIn, Moses Shali. And I was just talking that I think my thing about podcasting and loving to podcast is just the storytelling aspect. I love to hear all the intricacies of how people, founders, creators, teachers just started and how they've grown and sharing the amazing things that they're doing and just putting it out there and amplifying their voices. I think to me, that's always been the thing that has always stuck out for me. And that's always been my goal, like amplifying educator, education professional, founder, creator voices. I mean, it started off with educators and now it's almost everybody. So now I just want to amplify their voices and give a platform to many that maybe have not had an opportunity, which that's another thing that I have absolutely loved where I have been able to find amazing people doing amazing things that I just reach out to them and say, "Hey, would you like to be in my podcast?" Because they may feel like, "Hey, you know what? Like, I'm putting this out there. Maybe somebody will care, maybe somebody will not." And to me, I'm just like, "Oh my gosh, this is amazing and this is wonderful." And then I'll just, "Hey, you wanna be on my show?" And then from there, I've seen them take off, being on several shows after that, and they continue to grow. And that to me is just the best where you take a chance on somebody in that sense that you see the potential in what they're doing, and then they're on your show, and then after that, you just see them presenting at conferences and you see them on other podcasts and you see them continue to grow. And to me, that's what it's all about. And that's why I love that aspect of what I do because I feel that I am giving back to what has given me so much, which is the education space. Like I mentioned to you, I never once thought I never wanted to be a teacher. When I was in high school, I would say, man, I never want to be a teacher because a lot of friends that were graduating before I was were going into education. I was like, why would you want to do that? Like grade papers, do this and do that. And then came my time to be in education. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is the best thing that I have ever done. And so it's afforded me so much and it's opened up so many doors and so many opportunities, so much growth personally, professionally, that now my passion is to give back and give back in this way that, bringing in amazing guests and then have them continue to grow, share their passion, and just get out there and see them, like I mentioned, at conferences and run into them and see their success and things of that sort. And it just makes me feel good that we're doing something positive through My Edtech Life. And to me, that's the biggest thing. I've also learned through the 4 years to not overcomplicate things on the podcasting side. I've always been a follower of the KISS philosophy, which is keep it simple and streamlined. All right. So that last S is streamlined. I know that there's other things that can be added to there, but I'm all about just keeping it simple. So when I record my show, if I do it live, what you see is what you get. The audio is immediately going to go up on Spotify, and then the video goes up to YouTube and so on. And to me, it's not sheer laziness. It really isn't. A lot of people think, oh, he's lazy. He just doesn't want to do it. But to me, I think it's just, hey, number one, it's authentic. I'm not going to cut anything out. It was in that moment. That's what was said. That sometimes you get epiphanies during those shows. We just pop them in there. And then it's just the fact that my audience knows that it's live. They've already gotten used to the tech happens kind of deal where sometimes you'll get those little artifacts and so on. But they don't at least I haven't gotten any feedback that they mind that too much. I try and fix what I can if it's something that's really bad. But I think that they're used to it and I don't know if they appreciate it or not, but I mean, we've definitely grown as a podcast and it's just about getting things out there and just putting it there in our own way. And as much as there may be other ed tech podcasts, what I love about it, Daniel, is that we each put our own spin to it. So that's the other thing that I've learned that to me, this isn't a competition to see who's got the better podcast or not. Because when I listen to your podcast and I'm on my way to work, I was like, oh man, I wish I would have asked a question like that. Or you know what, that's a great question. And just listen to the way that you bring out the best in your guests. I'm like, oh yeah, like I'm learning from you, but I'm learning from your guests as well. And so it's just that ever evolving and ever learning process. So those are some of my takeaways in these 4 years that is just giving back, putting people and giving them an opportunity to amplify their voice and just to continue to learn and continue to bring some great conversations into our space.
Appreciate all that, and I would just say my reaction to that, my initial is, I mean, obviously, I could vouch for what you said you do because you definitely did that. I mean, when I was just a couple of episodes into my podcasting journey and trying to figure this whole thing out, you reached out to me randomly and was like, "Hey man, I love what you're doing. Keep it up. If you'd like to be on my show, I'd love to have you on." And I had an very early opportunity when I only had a handful of listeners listening, and that's obviously, as you said, it's grown tremendously since then. And I'm very lucky to have a way larger audience now than I did at the beginning of that journey. But you definitely did that for me. So you ain't lying when you say you did that for a lot of people. And so I appreciate that. And yeah, I mean, a lot of I think what you said resonates too around the storytelling piece. I would say that piece is really enjoyable for me. Probably my other favorite piece that, and I think I kind of heard this in what you said too, and just is modeled for me in some of the favorite podcasts I listen to. I've been able to check out a lot of your episodes on your podcast. And similarly, I would say you have a similar style, even though we have different perspectives. I think the spirit behind what you're trying to do, I think, is very similar to here, which is, man, I just also believe in a good long form conversation. Like, I think so much of the world today is like bite sized and it's very black and white in terms of you get a 60-second clip or you get
Mhm.
a tweet size response. And it can be very hard to get into the nuance and of a point of a conversation. And I think the reality is, from my perspective, is the world's very complex. There sometimes can be two things that feel very contradictory happening very at the same time. And that's just how it works. And I think the more you can have the long form conversation, you can, I think, have a just more of a space to really get into it, really try to parse out, really try to understand how two things that might feel contradictory can be true at the same time, and just grapple with that more in a way that I don't think social media and the way that a lot of folks dissect content today just endorse. And obviously, anybody listening to this and anyone listening to your podcast, I'm sure that resonates because that's obviously the way that we structure our shows. But I would say that's one thing that really just comes up for the reason I do it as well. And I would say, yeah, I mean, to your point about the streamline, definitely would affirm that. I mean, you continue to be one of the models for me of what is possible to be like a one man show. Again, doing this on our free time, we don't get paid to do this. Like, I'm not Joe Rogan. I'm not getting thousands, if not more millions of dollars to do this podcast. And
Mhm.
just have a team to help me bring it all to life, right? This is a labor of love that we do on our free time. And we do the best we can to try to put all those pieces together, from the content strategy to the conversation to the sound piece to the marketing and to all of those pieces. And so, and you have been a model, and I know we've had conversations offline where I've just reached out and asked you your advice of, hey, how would you do this, or how are you thinking about this, as I try to do the best I can to amplify the voices of my own voice as well as the folks that are coming onto the show as well. Let me also ask you this though, because I think you, in your own podcast, obviously you've said like your goal was to really give back to amplify voices. And I would say, check, you've definitely done that. And I appreciate you for, giving me some of that early motivation I needed in my journey to just keep going. Cause folks don't know, it can feel like a grind. And there's a lot of, I think, imposter syndrome that can come up. I know that when I decided to jump on and start this, I was scared. And again, I'm pretty confident. Like, I've done presentations to large groups of people. I would say public speaking is definitely one of the things that I would consider to be one of the strengths that I have in my professional life. But something about getting on a microphone or getting on a camera and doing that in a different way, man, that felt very scary. And I think the only reason I decided to do it is because, number one, AI, like my experience with AI was just so motivating for me. I felt like I wanted to learn and talk about this because of just the initial excitement I had around that experience. And then the second thing was like, well, to make sure that I don't back out, I'm going to post this on LinkedIn. And funny enough, I ended up getting 150 people reacting to it. And I was like, well, crap, this actually kind of went mini viral for me. And I don't feel like I can back out now. I feel like I have to do it now. But folks don't see you working at 8 p.m. doing these episodes. Sometimes you're talking into a microphone by yourself and it can feel very weird. It can feel very strange. And just wondering what advice you might have for some of those folks out there that are really talented, have amazing perspectives, and they haven't yet made the jump. Maybe they're on the fence. They're a little scared, just like I was. And they're thinking like, like I don't, my voice isn't important, or I'm not as smart as this person, or any of those thoughts that can sometimes come up. What would you offer them based on what you've learned or what's kept you in the game doing 4 years strong, and how to
Yeah,
encourage
definitely
them to
encourage.
take
Okay,
that leap?
so here's two things. Number one, if there is absolutely something that you are passionate about and you really want to talk about this, like for you, Daniel, I know it was AI, and you said, man, I just want to learn more about this and immerse myself in this world. But for anybody that's listening, in whatever space that you're in, find what you're most passionate about and that what you can just talk about with anybody and hold a conversation with for an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, that you could just talk with. Like if somebody were to tell you, hey, you know what, we need a speaker for this conference, and you can talk, like, what can you talk about for about an hour without even having to prep? Think about those things. And if it's something that you're passionate about that you really want to share, just click record. Just click record. And that's it. I know you mentioned something very important because in the very beginning, there was that imposter syndrome too, as well, thinking like, man, there's already so many people doing ed tech. There's already so many people. And later on, it was just like, yeah, there's so many people doing the ed tech podcasts, but none of them do it like I do. We all put our own spin in it. We do things differently, and we all have different perspectives and different opinions and different thought processes. So when you speak to somebody and you bring on a guest, sometimes those conversations can go like in a different way than you expected because you're just being authentic and being honest and it's coming through and you're just talking and conversing. And what I love the most is although I'll give my guests some guiding questions, many times just based on the first answer that they give me, I just draw from there and then just continue pulling those strings. And we just get this wonderful story coming out along the way that I'm just like, wow, this really blows me away. So just find what you're most passionate about, just click record. And also, here's another thing, if you do plan on having guests, do not be scared to reach out to anybody through DM. I know at first you'll be like, well, what if they say no? Well, no is an acceptable answer. Maybe they may not have time at that, moment that you're reaching out to them, but don't give up. If they say no, just say, oh, no problem. Maybe is this a bad date? If you can I reschedule you or maybe put you on for another time? And just be nice and be cordial. And you'll be surprised that even some of the biggest names that are out there that you're like, oh, I can never get them on. And you send them a DM, they're like, absolutely, like, I thought you'd never ask, and I was, "You know who I am?" They're like, "Absolutely, I've just been waiting." I was like, "Okay." So, you might be surprised, and I think that's the beautiful part about it too as well, that you'll be able to find a connection with your guests, and it's gonna be not just, an hour conversation like with Daniel. I mean, we connected just before he was on my podcast, and then after that, we had, like, maybe an hour-long conversations or maybe a couple sessions just to help him out, and now I get to be a guest on his show, and it's an ongoing friendship. It's not just a connect once and that's it. It's more of a connect once and you're pretty much connected for a while, that people that you can bounce ideas off of. So just be passionate, click record, don't be scared to ask people to be on your show, and also just keep it simple. Don't put too much pressure on yourself. Don't worry about the numbers, don't worry about the listeners, don't worry about there nobody's listening and so on. You just keep being consistent, bringing your passion and your storytelling process, your brand to life, and keep going because you'd be surprised in how little a time you've just got this down. And 4 years later, here you'll be, and you'll be like, hey, can't believe I have 271 episodes right now. I'm almost to 300 episodes, and I never thought that I would even get to that. I remember celebrating my first 100.
Wow.
I didn't even celebrate my second 100 because my 200th episode, because I just went boom, it was like a blur. Now 300, once I get there, it's gonna be a
Mm.
celebration. We'll do a big show and all those things, but celebrate those small victories. If you get 1 audience member, if you get 1 listen, you've got 10 listens, 100 listens. Celebrate all those little milestones and just don't compare yourself to anybody else. You do you, keep it simple, be yourself, and be consistent. That's the best advice that I can give.
Yeah, well said, brother. I think the only thing I would add there is just give yourself, as you said, just give yourself some grace when you're starting this. Keep the bar low. Cause I know if I go back and listen to my first episode, oh man, it's like feels so cringy now with everything that I've just learned along the way around sound quality and how to edit and the way that I'm marketing and just as you said, the just your overall comfort in how you're engaging and speaking into a microphone, whether you're talking to somebody or you're talking by
Mhm.
yourself. But again, just reminder, it's a journey. You're not gonna wake up one day and be Joe Rogan tomorrow in your first episode. So just take that pressure off, just get on it, start getting those reps in, right? Start learning. And one day you will look up and be really proud of what you've built. I mean, it's really astounding for me to think that I'm 50 episodes in. And when you say 271, I'm like, oh my God, I can't even imagine being like 50 has already felt like such a journey for me. So it's kudos to you for just continuing to stay in there and that and going through that experience. And I'm sure I'm going to have to continue to pick your brain and both on and off air about all that you've learned over 271 episodes, which is
For
just a
sure, man.
phenomenal
Anytime. We are,
accomplishment.
like I said, I always tell you, Daddy was like, just reach out to me and we'll get on a StreamYard. We'll have some sessions, whatever. And that's what I love. The thing too is, I think too, what I've learned about that is, and I think that's in the spirit, like the way that I am is I always like to give back and especially like that, like when you and I met the other day, and then there's other countless people that I get to meet with, and it's just I just want to give back for what you're doing and help you in those things that maybe I might have had a little trouble with at the beginning through the podcast, but I want to help you overcome those things, or anybody like when they have ideas, it's hey, let's bounce some ideas off of each other. I'll share my experience and maybe things that can help you and guide you along the way or help you overcome those things. And I think that's just the way that I have always been by nature. I'm always that kind of I have that servant leadership or it's just a servant's heart. And like I said, it's I love giving back and especially to people that are doing some great things and have really made an impact in what they're doing, but also made an impact on me and my learning process. So, like I said, I always have open invites. And that's the other thing too with the show. I always tell people, it's like anytime you're a guest, you always have an open invite for that next episode. And I said, you can just DM me and say, hey, Fonz, I've got something extra special or something that I want to share. Can we do the show? Absolutely. You just let me know and we'll make it happen. And so I kind of have that kind of a just an open door to those previous guests that I've had, or even people that may reach out and say, hey, can I be on your show? Yeah, let's go ahead and do it. Let's do it. And I like taking a shot on people that maybe I may not know too much about, but I'll look social media. Obviously, I want to make sure that it's something that lines up with my podcast and just say, hey, yeah, come on and we'll make it happen. And I don't know. It's just something that's worked for me. And like I said, 271 shows later, we're still here and we're still going. And it's been, for me, this has been very successful to me. Like you mentioned, we don't do it for money. Like we don't have sponsors. Luckily, I have been blessed to have some small sponsorships too that have helped. Obviously, this isn't all free, all of this that you see and all of that, but really through that labor of love, it's just that professional growth, that connection with other people, and then just giving back to the community. That's been a plus for me, man.
Appreciate it, Fonz. I'm definitely going to make sure also I link your podcast in our show notes. Everybody definitely go check out over 271 episodes. There is absolutely some dynamite episodes that you're going to be very interested in, regardless of what your interests are, because Fonz has been in the game for so long. He's talked about everything related to the educational and technology experience here. And just as a last quick point there, to on the spirit of what Fonz says too, if you're somebody listening to this, you decide to take the leap and start a podcast or start a blog, hey, feel free to message either of us. Send us that podcast, send us that blog. Hey, I'll listen to it. I'll be your first listener. I'll give you some feedback on it. So we know what it's like to start in the game and to take that risk and put yourself out there. And we're rooting for you if you're listening to this and this is motivating you to get in the game here and excited for you. So, Fonz, brother, thank you so much for being here today and just really appreciate all of your continued insight
Absolutely.
and
It's been an
your
honor.
service
It's
to
been
the
a
field
pleasure,
here.
Daniel. Thank you so much for having me and just allowing me to share on your podcast, just my experience talking about AI, talking about technology adoption and that vetting process, and just talking a little bit about my podcast too. So thank you for amplifying my voice. And it's always great to be on the receiving end of questions too, as well as a guest. So you did a phenomenal job. And I wish you just I wish you the best. Like you're killing it, my friend. Obvious. Look up. I have you on my queue. So every time there's a new episode, I'm there on driving on the way to work and everything. And so when you have your 100th, you let me know, man. And we'll do a co-celebration or something, dude. Because I want to celebrate you because you're doing some amazing stuff, man, for sure.
Well, that's a good motivator for me to make sure I make it to
Yes,
100 and keep on this
of
grind here.
course,
So
my friend.
thanks so much, Fonz. Appreciate you.